Hello, my name is Peter Rising. I'm a lifelong Star Trek fan who's old enough to remember when there was only one version of Star Trek. In this channel, I am here to go through every Star Trek ever and give you my goods, my bads, and a little bit of trivia thrown in. So this episode is the second pilot where no man has gone before. We're going to be running through this series in the only way it should be watched, in my opinion, which is production order. Let's get started. My first good is the score, again by original Star Trek composer Alexander Courage, and it hits you right from the get-go. There is some brand new music in this episode, very different from the original and the first pilot, and we go into this with a backdrop of what is my second good, which are the remastered effects, which shine brightly in this episode. Wonderful star field of the edge of the galaxy being shown on screen, which is absolutely stunning, and the effects remain so throughout this remastered episode. So two very strong, good items for me in this opening scene. The narration for those two opening good items is the first ever captain's log, which is narrated by my next good item in this episode, which is William Shatner as Captain James T, or maybe R, Kirk. We'll get to that later in the trivia. Captain James T. Kirk, William Shatner, absolutely brilliant casting choice. I don't feel like he quite got into the rhythm of Kirk immediately. He is very, very much Kirk in the next episode, which is the Corbomite maneuver in production order. Here, he's not quite there yet. I don't know if that's because there's a slightly different aesthetic with the uniforms, but it's so good to see William Shatner in this role, the role that he would become iconically tied to, and it's a joy for me. Definitely a thumbs up, definitely in the good category. The next thumbs up is for James Doohan, the wonderful and late great James Doohan playing Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott. He is wearing that awful salmon-coloured uniform. Before we get the correct uniforms, we still don't have them yet in this second pilot, but wonderful to see him in the transporter room where we would come to know and love him being, beaming people up, getting frustrated when the technology he manages on the ship doesn't quite go to plan and work the way he wants it to, but absolutely wonderful. A strong start seeing James Doohan here. The next good item on the list is Lee Kelso. He is in this episode alone. Kelso feels like a mainstay of Kirk's Enterprise bridge crew. He is sitting at the helm position. He calls down to the briefing lounge to tell the captain that the object they are tracking is now in tractor beam range, and I just love this character. His one and only appearance in the series, we'll get to more on that later, but Kelso's a great addition to the cast in the second pilot, and someone I very much enjoyed seeing on the bridge. The next good is Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell, Kirk's very best friend from Starfleet Academy days. So Beta Canon would have you believe, and it's referenced very slightly in this episode, but the strong bond between Mitchell and Kirk is emphasized very, very much so in this episode. Much stronger than that of Kirk and Spock. I think the Kirk and Spock bond is not quite there yet, and Gary Lockwood is absolutely amazing in this role. He really is a guest star in this episode, and boy does he nail the performance from start to finish. I love what he did with the character and the transformation that Gary goes through in this episode, and the interplay between Kirk and Mitchell in particular, I felt was heartbreaking to watch as they lose each other, as they lose that friendship when Mitchell becomes something very, very different as this episode progresses. So amazing performance by Gary Lockwood. A massive thumbs up from me is to Sally Kellerman as Dr. Elizabeth Dana. No surprises here either. The other main special guest star in this episode, and she, much like Shatner, plays off Gary Lockwood as Mitchell so brilliantly. The chemistry is there immediately from when they have that tense interaction on the bridge where Mitchell calls her a walking freezer unit, and it's just absolutely brilliant. They are just brilliant together, absolute dynamite, absolute gold. And Kellerman, a big star in the industry, just absolutely nails this character. So I absolutely love her portrayal and the journey that she goes on with particularly Mitchell and Kirk and everyone else around in the cast. The next thing I really love is the first ever appearance of George Takei as Sulu. Hikaru Sulu. Now, he doesn't quite look how we would get used to seeing him. He's in a different color. He's in a different role in this episode. He is the head of the astrophysics department, I believe it is. Astrosciences, I think he calls it when he's introduced on the bridge alongside the other department heads. So not at the helm, which is where we would come to get to know and love Sulu being throughout the rest of the series. And a little bit weird in the sense that as the character progresses, moving from astro sciences to being helmsman seems like a little bit of a demotion to me. I don't know if that would be a fair assessment or not, but I'm loving Sulu in this episode. He has some important contributions. He applies the mathematics of Mitchell's situation and presents those very important facts to Kirk so he can analyze and make decisions on what to do with Mitchell's situation as they approach it. So big plus having Sulu introduced very, very early in this second pilot. The next thing I absolutely love is the Enterprise as it goes into the Galaxy Edge barrier. Again, I'm referencing the wonderful effects here. These were wonderful in the original effects and particularly so in the remastered effects. And I feel I should give a real bit of love here to Walter M. Jeffries, or Matt Jeffries, who was the production designer on the original Star Trek series and who actually designed the Enterprise itself. So an iconic design, and he will forever be immortalized and associated with the Starship Enterprise and is referenced many, many times throughout the series in the form of Jeffries tubes. And I've got to admit, I didn't make that connection until I did research for this episode. So Jeffries tubes, Matt Jeffries, duh, it makes sense. Never knew that. So I'm learning things too, a seasoned Trekkie or Trekker, and I'm finding things out all this time later from watching it as a kid to being in my 50s. Amazing stuff, but love this scene, love the Enterprise going through the barrier, love the ship, love the effects, love the music, love the acting. Amazing. The next good thing is the briefing room and the briefing room scene. This is the second look we have at the briefing room and the final time we would see it in this form. It is the same set that was used for the briefing room in the cage. It looks a little bit different here. It's more colorful. It's got those red accents that also appear on the bridge. I haven't mentioned the bridge, actually. The bridge is getting closer to what we would expect it to look like in the original series. Again, it's not quite there yet. It's nearly there, but not quite. But I love this briefing room set, and I love the interactions between the senior staff, the department heads in this scene with Kirk asking for the opinions. Kirk is sat at the head of the table. He's clearly in charge, but he's an active listener. And I love that too. That is another good. That is the fact. Active listening is one of the skills that I try and apply in leadership in my day job, in my working life. And Kirk is so good at this. He listens to all of the people around the room, and then he makes decisions informed by those opinions, which, boy, is that tough to do, because you've got to consider everything, and sometimes he'll go in a completely different direction, but he's been informed by all the facts, and this is what's going to lead him forward to make the decision to maroon Gary Mitchell on the planet Delta Vega. But love this scene, love the interactions, love the set. The final time that we see it, I think this is very possibly, in fact, I'm near enough certain that this is a slight redress of what was the briefing lounge set at the very start of the episode, where Kirk and Spock are playing tridimensional chess, which is probably should be in the trivia section, actually. I need to mention that first appearance, and there's a bit of a spoiler, of the tridimensional chess set, and Kirk and Spock playing that game. And Spock, as much of a chess master as he is, he cannot beat Kirk at tridimensional chess, as we will see going through the series. So wonderful stuff. Love this scene. Spot on. The final thing that I really love about this episode is the chat between Kirk and Spock at the end of the episode. Yes, I'm skipping ahead here. I've maybe not covered a lot of things that you might want me to or expect me to cover in this episode, but I'm going on what I feel were the things that I liked, and some of what you feel I might have missed might be in the bad. So we get to the end. The episode is over. Mitchell and Dr. Dana have been lost, and we're back on the Enterprise. And Kirk and Spock really have the first chat, which indicates the beginnings of their incredible friendship that would develop over many, many years to come in many, many series and movies. This friendship, legendary. You could think that Kirk had a close best friend in Gary Mitchell. I'm not going to say that was nothing compared to Spock, because clearly it was in this dramatization, but it's just different. And the powerful friendship that he forges with Spock going along the way is very, very unique, very, very special. The same could be said of Spock and Captain Pike. It's indicated in the menagerie that the closeness of Spock and Pike and the lengths that Spock will go to, and we'll get to that episode. But again, from Spock's perspective, him and Kirk, just something cosmically meant to be. They are meant to be together, and what a wonderful friendship. So I love this exchange. I love how it ends. I believe there may be some hope for you after all, Mr. Spock, as Spock says, I felt for him too. And there's a little bit of the half-human side of Spock coming out there in that exchange, but loved it. Absolutely wonderful way to end the episode. Let's move on to what I wasn't so keen on in this episode, on to the bads. The first thing that I found really jarring, and I didn't like it from the first moment I saw it, is Spock in yellow. This just doesn't look right. And I know the uniforms haven't got to where they would be yet. We've still got those ones with the not black collars. I don't quite know how to describe that little ribbing on the collars that's not black, but it's not there yet. So they're still finding their feet. We've got people in different colored uniforms, like Sulu's in blue as well, and Scotty's in that awful salmon color. But I really don't like Spock in yellow, and I really don't like the way that his collar is more sticky-uppy or pointier than the rest of them. These uniforms in the second pilot, they weren't quite the same as the original pilot. The collars, again, were a slightly different shape or style, and I just didn't like this version of them. The first pilot, I liked a bit. This version, not so keen on. I'm going to be very happy when we're into episodes where we're getting that familiar look, shall we say. But Spock in yellow, not for me. The next thing that I really didn't like was our first ever look at sickbay. Now, this is a great set and would become iconic and very familiar when we would get to the introduction of Dr. Leonard McCoy in there, but it's not quite the sickbay that we would come to know and love here, because it's painted green and it just doesn't look right. I guess had it remained this color throughout the series, it would just be normal and we would be used to it that way. But here it's painted in green, and it just was jarring to me seeing it this way, and probably because I actually didn't see this second pilot until I was probably in my teenage years. In fact, I remember buying the video cassette of this when they started releasing them in the UK. I think we're talking in the mid to late 80s, and I bought this cassette and it had this second pilot on and the Corbomite Maneuver, which is the next one. They actually did release them in production order initially in the UK, and then when they got to the DVD release a few years later, they bizarrely, in my opinion, decided to release them in broadcast order, and to this day they're in broadcast order on streaming services, which doesn't make sense to me. But there you go. But I remember watching Star Trek growing up from a very young age. The first memory of it was probably seeing Arena, the one with the Gorn, a very memory that would stick in your head. But I didn't get to watch Star Trek and start recording them from the TV until much later in life, because we didn't have VCRs until the early 80s, and when the BBC in this country started putting them on TV again, I started recording them. But that's a story for a later time, just a hint of what's to come. But no, didn't like sickbay anyway. I went off a little bit on a tangent there, and I'll do that from time to time, and no apologies for doing so, because it's all interesting, I hope. Okay. The next thing I really didn't like was Kelso's death. Lee Kelso, we barely knew you. Great character, and I'm not a big fan of this sort of thing in general. I don't know why writers do this gratuitous death. I mean, I know it's there to illustrate the power of Mitchell and send a message, but when you can use a character again further down the line, I often wonder why do a death when it's really not necessary. So I liked this character of Lee Kelso. I did want and hope to see more of him, and his death was a sad moment for me and really not that necessary in the episode because the power of Mitchell was really there for all to see anyway. So it felt a little bit gratuitous for me, and writers do this so often in TV shows, and it bugs the heck out of me when they kill off good characters. And yeah, Lee Kelso's a one-off, but this is not unprecedented. You see it in shows that have had established characters for one season or a couple of seasons. I'm going to give you a slight spoiler here, but this reminder, this channel is going to be filled with spoilers. Star Trek Picard, Captain Liam Shaw, season 3, did not need to die. We could have had so much more from him, but I digress. But no, see you, Kelso. We barely knew you. The next thing that sort of took me out of the episode is Kirk is out looking for Mitchell and Dana after they've made their escape, and it's revealed that Dana has now got the ESP eyes as well, and he's got the phaser rifle now. Massive, should have been in the goods actually, the phaser rifle, because wonderful to see this. But the way he's sort of crawling around is just a little bit weird. He's sort of crawling along the ground, and then he's climbing up behind this rock for some reason. I don't know why is he climbing up behind this rock, and he puts the phaser rifle on top of the. Why does he do that? It just always made me wonder, why does he do that? What is the reason for doing that? If I was in Kirk's shoes there, trying to discreetly move around and get to Mitchell and Dana in as stealthy a way as possible, I don't think I would move that way. So those were some interesting choices that the actor Shatner and the production crew made in terms of shooting that scene. It's a minor quibble, I know, but it one I felt worth mentioning. And the final bad for me, the final thing that I don't like because it's different and I don't like change. But again, this came before what we came to know. It's the way Kirk calls the ship at the end of the scene. Now, we would become used to Kirk sort of flipping that communicator open and saying, Kirk to Enterprise. And he doesn't say it that way here. He very, very slowly and methodically says, Enterprise from Captain Kirk, come in. And it sort of pans away to the planet, and the Enterprise is in orbit, and you almost wonder for a second, oh, is the communicator working? Have they heard him? Are they going to answer? Is he suddenly stranded there? But the way he said that, it didn't feel very Kirk-like. But again, I'm going to give them a little bit of a break here because they hadn't really figured out the character of Kirk here. They hadn't got into his mannerisms and how he would be as a captain, and his stance and his swagger and all the things that make Kirk and the Kirk foo and all that good stuff. So minor quibble, but it's something that I always notice when I watch this episode. I'm a details guy, and you might think it's a bit harsh, but hey, I call it as I see it. So there you go. That's the end of the bads. So next we move on to the trivia, and this was the second pilot for Star Trek, and this certainly was at the time, to my knowledge, and possibly still is, to as best I know, the only or one of the few times where Hollywood has called for a second pilot of a show. They obviously liked enough of The Cage that they wanted to see more of the premise, the ship, the crew, the characters, but a lot was lost from that first pilot, and Spock is the only survivor. Leonard Nimoy is Spock, the only survivor in this episode. But we do get the beginnings of what would become our familiar command crew. We've got Kirk, we got Spock, we got Scotty, we got Sulu. So that is 4 out of what would become the established big 7, if you like, of the main 7 anyway, of our Star Trek, the original series crew. We've yet to see Uhura and Chekhov and Dr. McCoy. How can I forget Dr. McCoy? McCoy hasn't made it into there yet either. So 3 more main characters to be introduced and some supporting characters to be introduced thereafter as well, like Christine Chappell and Yeoman Janice Rand, although Yeoman Janice Rand was only there for a very brief few episodes of the first series of Star Trek, but would appear here and there later in movies, of course. So there we go. Second pilot. Very, very cool that they did this, that Star Trek got another shot, and thank goodness it did, because without that, we may never have had Star Trek at all. And wow, could you imagine a world now without Star Trek in it? I, for one, couldn't. This episode was directed by James Goldston, who did a fine job, in my opinion, setting the scene for what was to come. He would go on to direct another original series episode in season 1 called What Are Little Girls Made Of? So I really liked this. I liked the way that he put several things together, shooting angles and certain creative choices. There was things I didn't like, as I mentioned, things like Kirk putting the rifle on the rocks. So, but largely speaking, I'm nitpicking. And when I nitpick on these episodes as we go through, it's probably because I'm struggling to find other things to complain about. It's probably going to mean that there was more good things in an episode than was bad. So yeah, great job, James Goldston. Looking forward to see you again for my rewatch of What Are Little Girls Made Of in season 1, which will be coming up not too long from now. Now, although this was the second pilot, this episode was actually broadcast third when Star Trek debuted on television. We started with The Man Trap, then we had Charlie X, then came Where No Man Has Gone Before. Now, this order makes absolutely no sense to me because of the aesthetic change. We start with those 2 episodes I mentioned, Man Trap and Charlie X, and we have a very established look and feel, uniforms with the black collars. And then all of a sudden, episode 3, they've changed the uniforms, people must have thought, if they noticed it at all, if they were not absolute nitpickers like I am. And then after that, they go to the next episode and, they've changed back again. What was all that about? So makes very little sense to do it in the broadcast order, because also as well, and I'm probably being very geeky and very nitpicky again, because as the series goes through, as you go into Corbomite Maneuver next, through the series, they start to settle into their characters, and even with the established uniforms that come into play in the Corbomite Maneuver, there are some subtle differences that start to settle down. Spock still has a very sort of high collar in Corbomite Maneuver, and the look of his hair isn't quite settled yet. There's little nuances that absolute geeks like me would spot. So to me, that's why broadcast order can be very jarring. I think people subtly change along the way. That's certainly true of season 1 of Star Trek. Season 2 and 3, less so, I think, but there are still things that I can pick out there when you look at it in broadcast order as opposed to production order. So just my thoughts. One piece of trivia that I'm going to add going forward is, what score did these episodes get on IMDb? Now, this one got a 7.7. I'm not sure what the Cage got. We'll maybe look back at that at some point. But I think 7.7 is a good, solid score. I probably would be around there for an out of 10 score. Maybe I'll give this a 7.5, a good solid start to what would be our the beginnings of our core command crew and of the Starship Enterprise and telling stories. So it's not absolutely stellar, but it's solid. I think it's a very, very solid start. So I think 7.5 is a fair score. For me, anyway. Let me know what your score would be in the comments. Next piece of trivia, Andrea Drom, who plays Yeoman Smith on the bridge, who I think only gets one line when Kirk says Jones, and she says, "Name's Smith, sir." But she apparently is credited as being in The Naked Time as well, which I'm struggling to remember where she might be. When I get to that episode, I'm going to keep an eye out and see if I can spot her. But apparently she's in that episode too. But I had thought this was her only appearance in Star Trek, and she was really there as, in the 60s, she was there as window dressing, to be honest. That was how things were. We got some progression in Star Trek in terms of female and cultural representation, race, gender, all that was addressed, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so, as the series progressed. But yeah, she was really there as a token. I think in this episode had far less to do and say than say Yeoman Colt in the cage, or certainly number one. So not much going on here in terms of female representation on the bridge. We did get a strong female presence, of course, in Sally Kellerman as Dr. Dana, so that is good, and a fine, as I already referenced, chemistry and performance alongside Gary Lockwood. So we're getting some strong female presence on this episode, but Yeoman Smith, not a lot to do. Next, at the very start of the episode, Spock mentioned the fact that one of his ancestors married a human female. So this to me is a little bit of a continuity issue, if you like, because I don't think you would describe your parent as an ancestor. So I don't think they've clearly established who was Spock's human relation yet. It turns out that it would actually be his own mother, Amanda Grayson. So that was interesting, and it always makes me think, ancestor, that's a weird way of describing your father, Sarek. So yeah, always catches me out a little bit. Nice little piece of trivia there, though. And just another example of how we hadn't quite settled into who's who and the nature and deep details of some of these characters. Now, one piece of trivia that always interests me about this episode is, who is the first officer on the Enterprise? It's never actually specifically stated whether it's Spock or whether it's Mitchell. So, and I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And there are things in the comics and the books, the beta canon, if you like, which go two different ways on this. There is a novel that I read years ago called Enterprise, I think it's called, is it the first mission? And this depicts the story of Kirk taking command of the Enterprise from Captain Christopher Pike. And he brings Mitchell on board the Enterprise from memory, but he does not appoint him as first officer. He appoints Spock as first officer. Then there is a DC comic in the mid-80s that came out, I think written by Mike W. Barr, who was a great writer and editor of Star Trek comics in the 80s for DC. And this told a similar story of Kirk taking command of the Enterprise from Pike. And Pike suggests to Kirk in that story that Spock has earned the promotion. He'd be a fine first officer, and Kirk tells him, I've got someone else in mind. I'm going to make Gary Mitchell my first officer. So it's never explicitly in canon, to my knowledge anyway, stated who is the first officer. So it could be Spock, as we would come to know and love, or it could be Mitchell. A strong argument for the fact that it was actually Mitchell was that in The Enemy Within, which is an upcoming episode, Spock makes a log entry when Kirk is not able to do so, when he's incapacitated by what's going on in that episode, which we'll get to. And he says, ship's log, entry made by Second Officer Spock. So that could be a clue, maybe. It might be that by that time, not very, very long after Mitchell's death, that Kirk had not yet formally appointed a new first officer. Who knows? Let me know what you think. The next piece of trivia is the first and only appearance in the original series of a phaser rifle. And these are now called phasers. In the first pilot, I don't believe they were referenced to as phasers. I think they were called lasers. But now very, very firmly established as phasers, because Scotty calls down to the planet to talk to Kirk, and he said, did Mr. Spock get that phaser rifle that we sent down? So lovely piece of prop, if you like. Great phaser rifle, and really is the template for what would become the next generation phaser rifles. You can see how they had that in mind as a template, and they made something that was a natural evolution of that. So great to see it. I wish we'd seen it a bit more. We do get to see different types of phasers in the original series. Two, really, the Type 1 and the Type 2, and the Type 1 fits in to the Type 2, which is a neat little fact as well. So yeah, love this phaser rifle though. The next thing I really like is they beam down to Delta Vega, and we get quite a lot of this in Star Trek, the original series. We get some really nice matte paintings of backgrounds for planets. This is one of them, Delta Vega. Really, really stunning. And I don't know if this was slightly touched up or remastered for this episode, but it's true to the original painting if it is slightly redressed. Now, from memory, I think that this painting, much like the castle in the cage, did appear in other episodes until the remastered versions of Star Trek. I've got a strong memory or a strong feeling that it might have appeared as the penal colony Tantalus in the episode Dagger of the Mind. It's been that long since I've seen original Star Trek in its original unremastered form now, but I think that's one instance where that painting appeared again. But some of these paintings really, really great for their time, and gave a great impression of this Delta Vega lithium cracking station, as Spock describes it, where they beam down to, and it's a very lonely looking place, and they emphasize just what they're doing here when they beam down, that they're going to maroon a person, an individual here with no one else, as Dana comments, not a soul on this planet but us, and Kirk says, nobody but us chickens, Doctor, which is a reference from something, and I can't remember what now. Hit me up in the comments if you know what that is. I have read up on that before, but I've forgotten what it is. But really cool painting. I really like that. The next piece of trivia that we're going to reference here, and we've got a lot of trivia in this episode, and I sense that this may be where we're going to spend the bulk of our time in these episodes as we go forward. But it's something I'm going to call Leslie Watch, and this is the first appearance of what would be many, and I think more episodes than not, of Eddie Paskey, the late Eddie Paskey, as Lieutenant Leslie, who would appear all over the ship during the original series as 9 times out of 10 at the engineering station on the bridge. He would occasionally be at the helm. He would, I think on one episode, he was at the navigation station, unusually wearing yellow, I think that might have been in the Changeling, but he would be all over the place. He would be throughout the ship. He would be in sickbay sometimes. He would be down on the planet. He would die once in at least in Obsession, and then later in the episode be back at his station. But they think that detailed people like me aren't going to notice these little things. But tell you what, at the time, to be fair, there weren't VCRs, so people couldn't go back and nitpick and drill deep into these things. So fair play. I don't blame them for that. And not everyone is as eagle-eyed or obsessive as myself. Although in Trekdom, I think it's fair to say that there are many of us like that. But Leslie, I love. Now, I was a big fan growing up when I couldn't watch the original Star Trek episodes whenever I want. There were novelizations of them by James Blish. And in these novelizations by James Blish, Leslie was mentioned quite often, and they even gave him a first name. He was known in those novels as Frank Leslie. So I don't know if that ever made it into canon, but I always think of him as Lieutenant Frank Leslie, and he was even one of the few characters outside of the main command crew who got to sit in the captain's chair. He got to do so on at least 2 occasions, I think, in the Squire of Gothos and possibly the Alternative Factor as well. So wow, big opportunity there for Mr. Leslie. And the late Eddie Paskey would also go on to appear in Star Trek. It was either Star Trek Continues or Star Trek The New Voyages, which is the YouTube series of continuing the story of the 5-year mission. And he played his own father, Admiral Leslie, in that, which is really nice to see. Worth checking out those 2, Star Trek New Voyages, or Phase 2 as it came to be known, and Star Trek Continues. In fact, I may review those as I go through this series, but we'll continue to look out for Leslie in episodes going forward, so he's probably going to be mentioned more often than not, but I really like his character, background though he is. Our penultimate piece of trivia is the tombstone that Gary Mitchell erects in the final battle between himself and Kirk, and it says James R. Kirk on it. Now, I also noticed there's a date, a born and death date on there, and I couldn't quite make out what that was, or if it tied into the period of time that it should be in the late 23rd century, around 2265, I think this would be in Star Trek canon, a year before the official 5-year mission of the Enterprise would kick off in 2266. So, but yeah, James R. Kirk is a glaring error because he would become James T. Kirk. So I don't know what the original plan was for James R. Kirk, what the R was going to stand for, but even though it wasn't mentioned until the animated series, it was known from the get-go, I believe, in Gene Roddenberry's head that the T in James T. Kirk was to stand for Tiberius. So an interesting fact, and one that has been theorized many times in canon as Mitchell being so out of his mind at this point, drunk on power, that he even forgot what Kirk's middle name was. I do believe that in the final episode of Star Trek Continues, Kirk actually mentions this as well, that he forgot what my middle name was. A little bit of trivia there from Star Trek Continues again. So that was an interesting one, and it's one of the more famous pieces of trivia. I don't know if you can call it a goof because it came first, but it's there for all to see. And finally, we end with something I just had to mention. We have our first ever Kirk shirt tear. That's hard to say, actually. Now, throughout the series, Kirk would famously get his uniform shirt torn more times than I can count. Maybe we should keep a tally as we go through, but this was the first of what would become many. Kirk liked to show off his torso, and I'm wondering if that became less in Series 3 because... no offense, no shade thrown on Mr. Shatner here. He was getting a little bit on the more weighty side in series or season 3 of Star Trek, the original series. I still think he looked great, but he definitely put on a bit more weight by that point. But season 1, season 2, definitely more than a few instances of Kirk having his shirt torn and showing off that torso of his. And getting into action scenes with it. So this was the first of many of those, and it's going to be fun to keep up with those instances for sure. So there you go. Did you agree with my goods and bads? Do you think I missed any trivia? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what some of your goods and bads were for this episode, what you loved, what you didn't, any trivia that you'd like to add in as well that you are screaming at the screen now saying, surely you should have mentioned this, Peter. I would like to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Please give me a like if you've enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell as you do so. I'll see you on another episode very, very soon for more Star Trek, the original series, the good, the bad, and the trivia. Bye-bye.